The Ontario College of Psychologists takes aim at Jordan Peterson. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. First of all, Happy New Year's to everyone. It feels good to be back in action. I'm hopeful that 2023 will be great for everyone here. Now, to today's story. Jordan Peterson says the Ontario College of Psychologists has proposed disciplinary action after more than a dozen complaints were made about him. But, at the same time, Peterson says that none of the people who have levied complaints against him are, or have ever been, his clients, and he says that half of them falsely claimed to be his patients. Now, in response to this, the Ontario College of Psychologists says that it's unable to discuss why it is allegedly taking disciplinary action and trying to force social media training on Canadian commentator Jordan Peterson. Well, it seems like they're making the case because they received these complaints, and Jordan Peterson has directly contested that. It should be relatively easy to figure out who is telling the truth here. Peterson says none of them are his clients. If that's true, well, what are these complaints about in regards to psychology? Because presumably they would not have had his services then. It's all too easy to find somebody who is willing to make up a complaint about a famous person because they disagree with them. We have to ask ourselves if these complaints are politically driven or factual. And I want to also have a quick conversation about the usefulness of something like a college of professionals for a discipline, such as this one, the Ontario College of Psychologists. They certainly serve a purpose. They want to mandate the profession. They want to ensure that everyone who is operating within this field is living up to the highest degree of professional standards, and understandably so. Certain professions are just very impactful. Take psychologists, for example. The advice they give to people very often alters their lives. Take lawyers, for example, tasked with upholding things like rule of law and democracy. Take, for example, doctors, who, if mistakes are made, can end up killing someone. The issue that we'll talk about today, though, is overreach. Looking at these institutions and figuring out if they are trying to do too much beyond their mandate, if they're power tripping, if by their attempts to re-educate quote-unquote Jordan Peterson goes beyond the scope of their work, if they are concerned with his psychologist practice, which is their entire purpose, they should lay out their concerns about the psychology. Actual patients who have complained about the treatment. A fact-based case. But we're not seeing that from the college. Instead, it's very vague. It's giving off a hue of ideological attack. Peterson has been very vocal about his position. He then goes on to say that in his 20 years of practicing as a psychologist, he has had no complaints, but then when he rose to fame, that's when the issues occurred. In the documents that Peterson posted to Twitter, the college says that Peterson, quote-unquote, may have lacked professionalism in social media posts. So it seems like already there are two different goalposts here. There are the supposed complaints from his patients, and now we're talking about social media, which is completely out of the realm of this college's mandate. They say that in these posts and in a podcast appearance that he had in January 2022, which people are presuming is from an episode of the Joe Rogan podcast where he claims that there's no such thing as climate, is the one being addressed here. But the specific comments are not identified by the college. They're very vaguely saying that they have issue with his social media and the things that he said on various podcasts. The document from the college that was given to Peterson then goes on to say that they have a coaching plan for him, and he must, quote-unquote, review, reflect on, and ameliorate my professionalism in public statements. That's what they want him to sign off on. And they say that it'll cost about $225 per hour to take this training plan. So, Peterson then goes on to identify 4 very specific complaints that relate to his social media issues. One includes a joke he made about the New Zealand Prime Minister. Next was retweeting Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Federal Conservative Party. And further, he cites concern about his criticism of Trudeau. And another about former Principal Secretary Gerald Butts. In fact, with the Gerald example, what Peterson said to him was that he was stunningly corrupt and an incendiary fool, which is quite a statement to make. But keep in mind, though, these things have very little to do with psychology. Whether you're for or against the New Zealand Prime Minister, whether you're for or against Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre, whether you're for or against insulting a principal secretary, former or current, a professional association has no business digging into what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot say on social media, and further what opinions you can and cannot hold. You can see very quickly how this begins to become something of a slippery slope. Imagine a professional organization whose heads are ideologically driven. They have an agenda aside from mandating the proper practice of the profession. They have an agenda to promote things that one may consider politically driven. That's an easy path to subjugating an entire profession. The average person cannot afford to have their license stripped away. So, if they feel like they're not allowed to voice certain opinions online, if they're not allowed to share content from certain accounts, they're going to stop doing that because it's not worth the hassle. But now, certain freedoms are being encroached on, such as that of expression. And you have tied back to the, once again, mandate of the professional organization. The scope of their powers has to be contained somehow. They cannot arbitrarily seek to re-educate you because they don't like what you've said. They have to draw a very clear line between these supposed complaints and how it relates to your job, and how, further, those complaints are an indictment on the way you do your job and that you're no longer worthy of holding that license. It can't be so arbitrary as to say we don't like what you said here and there. Further, the association has had ample opportunity to respond to what Jordan Peterson has said, and they refuse to do that at every step of this journey. It leads me to believe that they are in over their head and they really have no case here. Look at all the individual aspects. The first thing was the alleged complaints from people. Well, Peterson says none of them are actually his clients. You can easily confirm that in Canada. We have things like paper trails and receipts, and I'm sure the association can get those. If they cannot confirm whether or not these are actual clients who've experienced his care before, these complaints are essentially meaningless because you cannot prove if they are actually real or they're trolls. Then move on to the next thing, the social media remarks, the amplifying Pierre Poilievre and dissing Trudeau and other left-wing figures. What's that have to do with anything? Then you have the podcast appearances, and it's the same question. What's that have to do with anything? And as I stated at the beginning, I do believe there is a place for professional organizations in Canada to keep the professions well-functioning and optimal. But their power cannot extend beyond the scope of that simple mandate. And it cannot be politically tinged either. Something like a democracy is fragile. Encroachments like this will do no good in that balancing act. If individuals are afraid to speak their mind because they are worried that their professional board will subject them to mandatory social media training and their license will be at stake, that's not a Canada that any of us can call free. In fact, that seems eerily similar to many authoritarian regimes that we constantly are afraid of entering. And there is one other point to highlight. Whether or not you agree with anything Peterson says is besides the point. I certainly don't agree with everything, and I'm sure you don't either. But what we're talking about, though, is his right to say these things, to post those things, and to not have his license dangled over his head as a form of ball and chain. One of the few exceptions I might grant is if someone is saying things that are contrary to the theories that are proven and mandatory for the success of the job. For example, if you have a doctor that goes around saying they don't believe in medicine or surgery, and instead they think that praying to the pepperoni god on top of a mountain is what will cure you, then yes, that is questionable, and saying those things and meaning them could actually have a direct correlation to your job performance, and further, your status of deserving that title, whatever it is. Taking unrelated political opinions, though, and using that as a grounds for mandatory retraining, that's a whole different ballgame, though, and something that we cannot stand for. Now, to close, Peterson has said that he will not be complying with this request from the College of Psychologists, and that he is going to seek a judicial review of their disciplinary proceedings. Now, I do hope that things work out well here. I don't think there's any merit to the case, but we'll see how things transpire. Maybe it turns out that some of the complaints are legitimate. I'll be open to that. But as it currently stands, the current case looks extremely weak and further motivated by illegitimate political considerations. So with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.